Jan, it is a true pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much for giving us a little bit of time here at the Rev Tech Revolution.
Thank you, Betsy. Nice to meet you too.
So can you tell me a little bit about your background and your career journey and how it pertains to your work at Deserve today?
Sure. Yeah, I had my PhD studies in Stanford in computational engineering about more than 10 years ago. And that is a quite obscure word, computational engineering. And in fact, that I was more focused on operations research, doing a lot of public policy analysis involving like running through a lot of complex statistical model to evaluate different kinds of public policies, mostly in the healthcare and the security area, and then apply the most optimal ones and find the recommendations. And after I graduate, I worked first at Yammer, which was acquired by Microsoft, and then subsequently at Wealthfront. And in both companies, I worked in data infrastructure side, learning how to build a big data infrastructure, as well as how to design a data system properly. And next, I went to Salesforce, where I worked on the Einstein platform. That platform is trying to gather all the CIM data that Salesforce has and try to design an easy-to-use system so end user can pull all the data in and build all sorts of AI models themselves without a lot of expertise in this area. So it's more like an AI platform. Some of the common threads throughout my PhD study and my first few jobs is that there are a lot of focus on democratizing the data, or even the analytics, or even the AI within the company or organization. So it's trying to empower the users to perform a lot of these tasks that usually are reserved by experts. I mean, and people in the company can learn how to ingest the data themselves, run analytics, and even get some insights out of it. So that's actually a very interesting point. And in this process, I was actually working with the founder and CEO of Deserve, Kalpesh, and in this all the time as a part-time help. I worked with a lot of projects, including the very first underwriting model that Deserve uses to underwrite international students that come to US without a credit background. That's how the Deserve was first started. And then in 2018, I came to join Deserve full-time and to lead data science and data engineering team here. Yeah.
Those are some impressive credentials, and clearly you're very underqualified for this conversation. Tell me a little bit about Deserve's value prop and why you decided to join the team. It's got a bit of a social mission too, it sounds like.
Yeah. So Deserve first started as a B2C company, and we issue credit card for people who come to US who don't have a credit background, international students. The founder used to be an international student. I used to be an international student. You came to the US without a lot of credit background, and you can't really get access to the financial system very easily. You can't build your credit score. And as many of us know, that without that, you cannot really get to your next step in terms of a lot of financial planning and get a good hold of your financial life in the US. Right?
Sure. Yeah.
So that's where we get started. And over the years, we have transitioned into more of a B2B business where we offer a modern credit card platform. What does that mean? And for example, if a company wants to issue their own credit card, today they will usually choose to go to either a big bank like Chase or Barclays, right, or to a processor like First Data who can offer them sort of integration for them to build their own solution. So Deserve offers that modern platform that can help them to do the whole thing end to end. And starting from signing the contract, you will get a full credit card program running at the end of the day, at the end of the period, right? I mean, technologically wise, credit card is a very mature product. It has been here 40, 50, 60 years. Right? I mean, and there's a lot of things changed in the past decade or so. When I say a modern platform, what I mean are the things like in cloud infrastructure, like microservice architecture, like real-time data or real-time decisioning. All these are hallmarks of modern day technology companies. Right? I mean, and we are trying to bring all this into a credit card space. And what this means is that it will unlock a lot of features and a lot of things that benefits that previously was not commonly seen in this field. For example, we have unparalleled go-to-market speed. You can launch a credit card in very short period because of all the flexibility and all the infusion of modern technology stacks. And also, we have a lot of flexibility in API integration. You can present to your customer a front that is truly your own customized journey, and it's not something of a big bang fronted by a big bang image or something like that. It's your own marketing brand, your own experience, user experience, right? And also we are having this so-called digital first platform, where we put smartphone as a center of the entire experience. I mean, traditionally, you use websites to integrate with a lot of your credit card, all of your credit cards, and the smartphone is all, or any access through the phone is afterthought, so to speak, right? I mean, but we are in a modern age where people interact more and more on their phones, so we want to put the smartphone as a center stage, as a center of your entire experiences, and that is a very new value proposition.
It's fascinating. Are you enabling others to do tricky data sets like what you started out with international students? Is that part of what you're doing, or is it much more for the average credit card issuer?
That's a good question. So as I said, this is an end-to-end credit card platform, right? I mean, it includes a lot of difficult problems what you will have to encounter when you are trying to issue a credit card. Underwriting is undoubtedly one of the more thorny problems in the process. Right? I mean, so we offer consultancy in the area. We will help you to shape your underwriting policies. We have experiences underwriting international students without credit experience. We have experiences in underwriting subprime people, super prime people, and we even have a business card program. So we can underwrite different segments, and we have a lot of experiences in doing so. And we will offer all this learning as a part of the platform package.
That's a really cool value prop. So I'm curious about how the things that you worked on in Stanford when you were doing your PhD on public policy analysis basically connects to the problems you're solving today at Deserve.
That's a very interesting question, Betsy. Not many people ask that because what I did in PhD is not directly related to finance, but there's actually a lot of connections in all of them, right? And, I mean, that's more than a decade ago. People use a lot of complex models to assess performance, and there are a lot of potential solutions. And as you may expect, some of the most performant solutions usually are the most costly or having the most side effect. And you have to make some kind of trade-off to arrive at a sweet spot. Then fast forward 10 years, we have machine learning. It's all the rage right now. And it actually greatly improves the efficiency where you can find that sweet spot. But the fundamental problem is still the same. You have the so-called constraint optimization problem, which translates to normal layman's term is just you want to optimize something, but there are some other criteria you have to fulfill, right? I mean, you are trying to trade off things. For example, in Deserve, when you're doing underwriting, you are trading off how many people you can approve versus what's the default rate of your customer base. I mean, you cannot get all in on one aspect. You have to find a sweet spot. I mean, economy, people always say that trade-off is the currency of all decision making. And
absolutely.
It's basically trying to find that good spot, and sometimes to find that incremental 1%, 2% improvement can be very beneficial for the entire business process. For example, if I can keep the approval rate at the same level, but reduce the default rate by half a percentage point, I can adjust my model to say, instead staying at the same risk level, but then we can approve 5% more people. And all these incrementals are actually extremely hard because you have all the low-hanging fruit taken already. And the model and all the analytics trying to find when you are doing very well, how do you get the additional 5%, 10%? Yeah, and that is actually a common theme across all the quantitative analysis I have done in my PhD days and in all my jobs.
Yeah, that's interesting. And that's something that we all wrestle with in one way or another, particularly the listeners of Rev Tech Revolution. You know, there's huge data sets and learnings that can be gained by putting constraints on those data sets, right? And trying to find that sweet spot around risk or around cost, whatever the case may be. So I think one of the things that our listeners might be interested in learning from you is, as the head of a data center of excellence, what are some of the important things you bring to this kind of constraint question? And then as a follow-up to that question, what are the important things for other folks who are in your shoes to do to make sure that people trust the data?
Nowadays, a lot of companies are striving to become data-driven. Basically, making decisions, improving their business flow based on data, not based on heuristic decisions. Right? We used to have like a joking term called HIPPO, which is the highest paid person's opinion, and
For
we don't want
sure.
that to happen. Yeah.
It still does, Jan. It still does.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, it's quite easy to say that your company is like data driven, but to get to there are a few things you should set up. In my experiences, one of the first things you want to work on is that to set up at an organization level some kind of like good metrics. How do you measure outcomes? How do you make sure that everything is measured by data? And if something is measurable, first question is, and if it's measurable, how do we get that metrics in going? It's a lot easier if you have a top-down push on making the entire organization into a data-driven culture. Right? And the second thing that is often overlooked is that you have to reduce the cost of exploration. It's not only like a few people in the company has the control of the data. I mean, they are the master of like giving out all the information to the rest of the company. That will not scale your business. To scale your business in a data-driven way, you have to make sure that all different people in the company of different functional groups will have access to good data. They will even have access to a lot of good explorations. They can get to their own conclusion. In that way, the data team in a lot of companies that are successful I have worked with usually revolves around the data team being sort of internal consultancy. People come to the data team with questions. The data team will work with a different functional team to get answers for them. But answers is not the only deliverable of the team. A large part of deliverable is to train and educate other teams and helping them to learn how to use the data, how to interpret the data, and more importantly, how to question whether we have the data necessary to make a lot of business process successful. Because all these questions most commonly doesn't come from the data team. They come from all the individual business functional groups.
Yeah, I like that. It sounds like the thread of democratization is in that part of your conversation as well, is really making sure that everybody has access to it. But I guess the corollary to me is how once they have access to it and they're starting to try and answer questions that are pertinent to their individual responsibilities, how do you make sure that they trust the data? Because it can be really difficult to make sure that you've got the accuracy, you've got the completeness, you've got all of the factors that yield good answers.
Yeah. So data quality is actually the thing that I emphasize most when I'm trying to build a data team. I mean, this is often an area that is overlooked. Yeah, Bessie, you are just like spot on. A lot of companies are very hyper-focused in getting the data into their warehouse. So making sure they have the necessary data to perform everything. And once they have that data, they sort of forget they need to keep on checking the accuracy of the data to make sure the quality is correct. And so one of the responsibility of a data team, in my view, is to make sure that you have a common data quality framework that is run on top of all your data. This framework should incorporate the business recommendations from all the business functional group, how to check whether the data is correct, and run all these rules periodically. Alert different teams if the data quality can be wrong sometimes. I mean, and it inevitably will. What can fail will always fail, right?
Yeah, right. Especially with data quality.
Yes, especially with data quality. And also, you will need to establish proper data lineage. And that is something that is often talked about because depending on use case, one piece of data may be present on different warehouses in your organization. It's not in one place. It's sometimes in a dozen places. So you need to know, like, data A is derived from data B, is derived from data C. So you establish that proper chain, and so that whenever one piece of data quality fails, you know that all the downstream and data will need to be taken with a big grain of salt. Yeah.
That's good advice. Tell me what you advise teams on data governance. What does data governance mean to people who are starting to get that set up inside their culture? And what are one or two things you would recommend people focus on?
Yeah, data governance is tricky, and because it's sort of like opposite to the notion of having data democratization where everyone can access. I mean, that's again the trade-off you have to do. I mean, you want as many people to access much data as possible, but at the same time, you want to make sure that they get proper access to the proper data, right?
They have to play nice in the sandbox, right?
Yeah. Yes, that's right. Exactly. So some of the first things you can do include like you want to define the roles and data leads properly. I mean, who in your company requires certain piece of data? Usually, PII data, personally identifiable data, like people's phone, people's email address, even people's social security number, are not required for most of the analysis. Right? I mean, in a lot of backend analysis, you just need to know how to identify a specific person, whether this person from this system is the same customer from the other system, whether they are the same person. You don't need to know what's their phone number, what's their email address to do that analysis. So in these cases, we don't want to actually even review those data. That being said, there are other use cases, right? For example, you do a marketing project. I mean, you want to reach out to the customer. Obviously, you need to have the email address or some sort of contact to do that. So all these roles and data needs to be defined by the infrastructure team and the security team jointly, and to understand all these data in these warehouses, in these pipelines, are used for these purposes, and some others are for other purposes. And you should always question yourself whether you need to have a certain piece of data stored, especially it's a sensitive information, right? And when you're organizing your data warehouse, put in catalogs. So you know that this is level 1 access, this level 2, or whatever catalog system that you feel that's reasonable for you. Then that way you can help to understand what are the dependencies in between them, and then build up the proper data lineage. As I have mentioned, sensitive data may drive other analysis downstream, and you want to make sure that they are in the same catalog as the source data, right? And then for people who are new into this field, there are a lot of vendors out there who offer tokenization and encryption services. You can take advantage of them. If you don't need to store the data in your own system, you don't have to, right? For example, Deserve tokenize all our sensitive information like social security number, like credit card number, with an encryption service. So people in Deserve don't even see those things. We can't even see those things. And so when all this information flow into the Deserve system, it's already encrypted. And so that actually removes a lot of hassle of yourself to manage these processes.
For sure. That's great. So it sounds like you've got the data governance thing nailed at Deserve. What are some of the thorniest problems you're facing with data quality and when it comes to machine learning, and how have you overcome them?
Oh, how much time do we have for that?
Right.
Yeah, so there are some common things that everyone in the data field is suffering, more or less, right? I mean, one of them is a lack of sufficient high-quality data. We already went through that. I mean, especially for small startups, it kind of feels like a chicken and egg problem. You don't have the product, you don't get data. You don't get data, you don't have the product. So,
yeah, right.
So I mean, it's hard to break out that loop, right? I mean, so it's important to do some sort of iterative approach. Start with something small, even heuristic. The first model that Deserve uses that tries to underwrite international students is heuristic. I based it on a lot of social science papers, a lot of studies, and there are a lot of heuristic components on it. But once we start pushing the program out, we get data, then we can start reinforce it, and we can make it more and more data-driven, right? And in that process, data quality is very important. You have to set data quality in place. You have to set data cleansing in the proper way, so that your model is actually ingesting something other than garbage, right? Yeah, and that's one of the problems. And another problem we usually run into, especially in highly regulated industry like lending business, is that you have to be able to interpret your model. I know that for companies that do not operate in such an environment, model interpretability sometimes is overlooked because, why do I need to interpret it if it works? This is often the argument, right?
The black box works, so don't open it up.
Yeah. The counter argument is that yes, you don't need to understand it if it works, but it will not work forever. One day it will fail, and if you understand how it got the initial results, it's a lot easier for you to know how to fix it rather than in just tinkering with the box, right? In recent years, there are a lot of research going into this field, and there are some standard practices. To measure the interpretability of your model, and it's just nice for each data science team to invest some effort into it to understand. Starting from a simple model, don't just go one step into the most sophisticated model you will ever have. Yes, you will get performance, but you will lose a lot of insights along the way. As you build a simple model and then expand it, then you will come to realize what are the information and the signals that are most important. And that sometimes drives your other business process. Oh, maybe we found some new insights and in the process of building that model. And this is usually where the interesting things happen, right? Yeah. I think that's two honest problems I've been facing right now.
So one of the things that our listeners experience around model interpretability is they're buying software that has AI models in it that suggests next best action. So something along the lines of Einstein, right? They're looking at big data that is perhaps in a CRM and starting to make recommendations on correlations and all of that. If you're using a third-party software, what do you do about model interpretability? Like, how do you think about that problem?
Yeah, there are a few ways of interpreting the model. Including black box and white box approach. A white box approach in which you have to open up the model, and that's usually happening when you are building the model in-house. But it's not the only way available. In a black box approach, you still know that what kind of input gives you what kind of output. So you can still run analysis to see, okay, which are the attributes that most influence the output and how we should do it. And this actually ties to another question about whether your results are making sense, whether your results are fair or are discriminating people. And that's also another very hot topic, right? So all in all, you will need to always try to see if the model prediction is making sense and what is it saying about your input, even if the model itself is third party.
Yeah. And if you're doing due diligence on a piece of software that has AI and is making recommendations to you about your pipeline, your sales pipeline, what are a couple good questions to ask before you actually purchase?
So obviously Obviously you want to ask about the performance and how the performance arrived, what's the sample size of the data they used to get these results. But it's also important to know that what do they use to get that model, whether the input signals and everything is aligning with your use case. Your customer base will be very different more often than not compared to the customer base they use to train their generic models. So a lot of these third-party generic model scores are very useful, partly because they are built with very large data sizes that some of the smaller companies may not have access to themselves. But I'm always advocating using their outputs combined with your own data to try to make further decisions on top of it instead of blindly plugging that number into your system. Try to understand how they get the number and correlate that with your own customer base information, and then make use of that score more effectively for your own business use case.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let me shift gears just a little bit because we've been kind of dancing around Salesforce and you've got some background there. How is dealing with big data different at a company like Deserve compared to a large company like Salesforce?
Well, I mean, big data in big companies are much bigger. That's the first difference.
Right.
Yeah, so there are different priorities. For example, you may not need the most cutting edge big data processing technology because your data scale is not there yet. But you do need a lot of the same good practice around the big data and inside the company, how you handle the data storage, how you design the data warehouse according to your use case. All these practice still stick. What is very different in a small startup compared to a big company is that in a startup, things move like 10 times faster. So sometimes you are forced to make a delivery of a product or a system faster than you can. You can properly design the whole infrastructure. At this time, it's useful to leverage some of the third-party solutions or open source solutions that can help you to get there. Right? Being in a small company means that you are more free to experiment with newer technologies, and you usually have a much more cutting edge technology stack, not because you are small, but because that you just have a lower cost of exploration. Right? I mean, so that you should use that to your advantage. I mean, try to stay on top of what is currently most popular in the industry, why people do that, why people do design certain systems. Sometimes big companies design their data systems specifically to address their big data needs, which may not be applicable to your use cases. So you need to take all those things into consideration.
All right, so let's shift gears again. As an internal consultant to many business units, what do you advise is the most important thing to do when the volume and the velocity and the complexity of the data just gets really overwhelming?
Yeah. So there are a few steps I usually take when I'm setting up data pipelines or data systems for a company. The first thing is to set up priorities, as in you understand how data plays in the business strategy of your company, whether your company is selling data or whether the data is not being sold exclusively, but it's used as part of the enhancement to your product appeal, or if the data is purely feeding into your analytics, not into any product, right? I mean, so and also what are the use cases? Whether it's real time or whether it's where the latency is extremely important, you need to get data or decision out very fast, or it is a big batch analytics driven approach. So all these questions will affect how you design your data infrastructure. And then you need to have a good data infrastructure team. I know the data science is all the rage now, but to have a proper data science team, you will want to build a good data engineering team, a data infrastructure team that can help you to get all the pipeline, all the warehouse in place. You know which piece of data, what use case corresponds to what kind of system. Right? And then thirdly is that, make sure that your security team is on board. Always work with your security team very closely. That is without needing to be emphasized enough. Right? So the security is an important component. You want to make sure that the data is governed properly in your system. Otherwise, it will all go haywire later. And then I would recommend the people who start to have a unified analytics tool. That means the data warehouse can be there can be a lot of data warehouses, many varieties depending on the use case. But you should have a central analytics tool where all the people in the company can go to that tool to get the analytics results and can share with each other. That just reduces the cost of exploration that I mentioned earlier. So all these are good practices. Overall, building a strong data science team and data engineering team will help the company in the long term. Yeah.
I'm gonna throw a crystal ball question at you. I was at an O'Reilly conference 3 or 4 years ago on AI, and I went to the Microsoft booth, and they said, within 4 years, you're going to be able to open up Excel, and AI will solve most of your biggest problems. What's your prediction that you could put about the maturation of AI on in the next 2 or 3 years? What are what are the frontiers that are just going to become de rigueur that AI is right on that cusp of solving that might surprise the listeners?
Yeah. So a lot of recent AI research has been focusing on the deep learning aspects. I mean, computer vision, natural language processing, and human-computer interaction. All these are advancing at a very fast speed, and there are a lot of amazing breakthroughs. On the other hand, we have more traditional structured data exploration. How do we solve a problem with very well-defined data? I mean, a predictive problem. All those we also have advances there, but not as fast as the deep learning aspect. Right? I mean, so but 90% of time, your roadblock is not how advanced the technology is or how advanced your AI technology is. Your roadblock is usually you do not have decent enough data, and your data doesn't make sense, or it seems to make sense, but there are a lot of quality issues underneath, and that is why it doesn't give you the correct conclusions. And those are the problems that will not easily go away because it's only partly a technical problem. It's to a much larger extent a business problem. How do you define your things correctly?
Or a human behavior problem too, right?
Yeah, human behavior. To make computers understand and to make computers make predictions, you have to teach them what each things mean, right? I mean, you need to define your data accurately. If your data itself has internal inconsistencies, there's no way that even the most cutting edge model will give you reliable predictions. Right?
Yep. We 100% agree with you and run into that all the time. This has been really a pleasure, Jan. Thank you so much for spending some time with us at the Rev Tech Revolution. One last question before we go. If you could leave our audience with one piece of advice about getting the balance between good data and big data right, what would it be?
Yeah, that's sort of the eternal problem. I mean, especially in a regulated industry, this question got asked a lot. Right? I mean, how do you make sure that your model is not doing bad things? How do you make sure that your model is fair? There is a so-called term, this term of fairness-aware machine learning, right? So there are a lot of different ways you can do, but the most importantly, at the very fundamental level, you must vet the input signals into model properly, and then you must understand what are the things you can use and you should stay away from. Some of the signals are themselves discriminatory, and you should not introduce that into your model if discrimination is a big concern here, right? And just like when you are periodically assessing the performance of a model, you always assess whether your model is still up to date from a performance point of view. You should also assess them from a fairness or discrimination point of view. Where in Deserve, we often run the analysis to see if the model is imposing any sort of discriminatory effect. You should include that as part of your model monitoring process.
And yeah, not to interrupt you, but just to help the listeners understand a little bit, are there one or two factors that you can share with us that gave you discriminatory outputs when you were playing around with model or building it to begin with?
Yeah, sure.
Or something that's counterintuitive in that regard that we wouldn't be thinking of?
In general, I mean, you do not want to use geographical data too much at very high importance because, I mean, there are discriminatory factors associated with that, right? I mean, and you need to be careful.
Cetera,
yeah, you need to be careful of using things like school or major or a lot of things that educational variables that can be in itself misleading. But I would say it largely depends on your use case and how much strict you want to go. I mean, if you want to be completely 100% safe, you probably are left with not much data you can use with, right? So there is again that common theme of striking at a good trade-off. Yeah, and there are even cutting edge machine learning methods where they use an adversarial model. They build two models, one to try to enhance performance, the second one try to second guess and make sure that it's being discriminated and the two models being trained together. All these are quite interesting topics that people can explore. Right?
Wonderful. All right. Again, just thank you so much for all your time, Jan. It's been really fun talking to you, and hopefully we can do it again sometime soon.
Same here. Thank you.